Specifically, when I say neurodiversity, I'm talking about people that are in the autistic spectrum. And that spectrum, is very, very wide, all the way from one side where they're very highly functional to those that have a real hard challenge, both mentally and physically, trying to deal with our world. Kyle, you and I would be considered neurotypicals. I'll start by saying that the world around us is a neurotypical world. In a neurotypical world that make the neurodiverse very, very difficult to deal with.
This is the Rebel HR Podcast, the podcast where we talk to human resources innovators about innovation in the world of HR. If you're a people leader or you're looking for a new way to think about how to help others be successful, this is the podcast for you. Rebel on, HR Rebels. All right, Rebel HR listeners, I'm extremely excited. I'm just super pumped up just after the last few minutes pre-recording here, talking to our guest, Tom Tonkin. Tom is the CEO and founder of the Conservatory Group. It's an organization that provides high-touch services to business executives that want to improve themselves, their team, and their environment. He has a significant amount of experience as an executive in corporate America, and spent a lot of time in a company, if anybody uses PeopleSoft, that you're all aware of, which is Oracle, which is near and dear to my heart. It was the first HRIS that I ever used. So thanks for bringing me back full circle there, Tom. Welcome to the show.
Well, I'm glad you let me on your show after that. That was your first HRIS.
At the time, I didn't know what I didn't know. So it was great, right? It's all about your expectations.
Yes, sir.
Well, extremely excited for the conversation today. We got a lot of topics we want to cover. But before we get into that, I just want to ask you to give us a little bit more detail about the company that you founded and what led you into the world of learning and development.
Yeah, Kyle, thanks a lot for having me. And we've already had way too much fun before the recording. But what I've done is I've actually harkened back to when I was a young teenager, learning how to be a musician. And that's why the term conservatory comes from. Right? It's this idea that can I take the way I learned an instrument in music and apply it to business paradigms and issues? Hence the Conservatory Group, which is an umbrella organization for multiple conservatories, uses the same kind of model. Specifically, I have something called the Sales Conservatory, where we service sales leaders and represent, sales representatives and things along those lines. I got to tell you, I don't think myself or yourself or any of your listeners ever said, boy, when I grow up, I'm going to be an HR professional.
I didn't.
You didn't do that?
No, I didn't even know what it was until I got the job.
I wanted to be a dentist because I thought the gear was kind of cool, but I'm a gear kind of guy. So I don't know how I got into this space because there's no gear. But what led me to where I am now was really coming to the realization that it really wasn't about the technology. It was really about the people and the behavior and the motivations. And I thought that if you built, the better mousetrap, the better tech, speaking about our HRISs or any of these applications, you thought, well, if you've got the great tool, it all works itself out. But the fact is it doesn't. And it really is about the people. You can have same tool, two different groups. Somebody likes it, somebody hates it, right? So it's really around the behavior. And I've really went down both a professional and academic route, understanding organizational behaviors and trying to find out what makes people tick, which led me down the sales path, leadership path, and obviously the things we were talking about earlier about diversity, equity, and inclusion. And then some of the more, shall I say, soft skills, an overused term, but I think we all know what that means.
Yeah, absolutely. So now I know why we get along, because my first career choice was musician. And then I quickly found out, I can't make any money doing this, but I can make a lot of friends. So I used it's kind of like my career is a derivative of my original career idea. And then I'm in HR and now I don't make any friends, but
Well, it's Kyle, it's funny you mention it because when I was a musician, I ended up being a professional musician at one point. That doesn't mean anything, right? That just means that I got $200, for 40 hours worth of work and and I was a bass
and a
player.
lifetime of
Bass
training.
amps were huge. But what the realization that I came to was I thought that if I was a really good musician, I would make it. And that was naive. And I think it continues to be the same paradigm in the business world. If you are the best fill in the blank, will you be successful in that field? And I've come to the realization in my ripe old age of blah, 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 that is not the case. That it requires people understanding, it requires rapport building, it requires all sorts of things, people networking with people and understanding their motivations and all that is really how you're going to be successful. And so I think I've made a career of helping people understand it and come to that realization.
No, I love that. I love that perspective. And I just think it's so true. And I'm sure everybody listening to this right now can think of those individuals who you look at them and you're like, how'd you get here? Right? Like you're just questioning, like, if there's not that, the capability or the competence to do the kind of the bare expectation. But I really do think sometimes it does come down to that ability to win others over and some of those soft skills. So I kind of want to dive into this a little bit. And I know you mentioned this term so overused, and I agree. I hear soft skills and it's just kind of like, it's just a buzzword at this point. But I do think that there's something to be learned from the individuals that have them, and that in my experience, those with soft skills end up in my office a lot less. So it's to every HR professional's benefit to make sure that their team are well educated on things like communication and getting along with others and showing up on time and having good work ethic and all the things that it seems like employers are struggling with, at least that I speak to. So as you approach your learning and development and your structure of learning and development, how do you address some of those things that I think a lot of people consider to be those soft skills?
Yeah, I think the best way to start is sort of put out some tenets or some principles to work around. I came to this realization maybe, 2 decades ago, and I am a curious person by nature, and I wanted to get to the bottom of it. And so you take a term like, say, soft skills or hard skills, and we'll throw that in there for comparison's sake. You should take a look at these and say, well, what soft skills are things you do with people, hard skills are things you do with things. If that's the case, then the feedback and the output and the results all should be driven by those things. So, for example, hard skills, if I do those with things, coding, let's say, then the code should tell you whether or not you did well. The code should give you the feedback. The code should be the thing that helps you learn. If soft skills are things you do with people, then the same is with people. People should tell you whether or not you're successful. People should help you learn those skills. Another principle I throw out there is there isn't a soft skill that I don't think you can learn. I think a lot of people have a limiting belief that a soft skill, say, rapport building, trust, some kind of compassion, empathy, are things that you're born with. And that's just not true. Yeah, you're born with something, but you can improve every single one of those things. And that's where I've spent a lot of my time, is trying to figure out, how do I teach people, or how do I help learn? I don't like the word teacher. I like learning facilitator. It's more outcome based. Mm-hmm. How can I make a better learning facilitator to those that are trying to become, say, more compassionate, more empathetic?
We'll be back after a quick break.
And so used to having everything in front of them right away that we forget that innovation just takes time. I myself get frustrated too. Why? And this as being one of my best friends is, hey, I talk to you all the time. Hey, man, I'm frustrated in the fact that I can't seem to just get there in the next day. But that's just not how these things work, right? Innovation needs to be planned out. It needs to be very methodical. And then when it finally hits, that's when it seems like to everyone else that it sort of just came out of nowhere. But to you, the amount of dedication that it took over that time.
Absolutely. So, yeah, I distinctly remember I had a mindset shift early in my career, and I was always raised to believe, you either got it or you don't, right? Very similar to the argument around, you're either born a leader or you're not. Nature versus nurture, if you will. And I think, I've been proven wrong time and time again when I had a preconceived notion of how somebody's reaction was going to be or how good they were going to be at a certain job. And it turns out, you know what? I was wrong a lot because I was operating from a state of assumption and I wasn't giving people the benefit of the doubt. And so, hey, guess what? That's one of the soft skills I needed to work on, right? So I think it's really fascinating. The other thing it reminds me of is the old school make versus buy, where you can either make somebody something or you have to buy it, i.e. you have to hire it. And, and then you can look at the competencies and how easy it is to develop and how hard it is to develop. So I know you've done a lot of research in this area. As you've looked at that, do you buy into that there are some things that are easier to teach than others? Or is it too interdependent on the person that you're trying to help?
No, I don't believe that one thing is easier. I actually think all of it is easy. The problem is we have some strong headwinds in the learning and development world that is making it very difficult. And I'm going to call out, a few technological paradigms. If you take a look at the way online learning, for example, is done today, it is wired 100% for hard skills. It is terrible for soft skills. And I'll dive into a little bit of my academic background, give your listeners something to Google. So when you are trying to teach somebody hard skills, things you do with things, what you want to do is you want to tickle their prefrontal cortex, right? The cognitive aspects of their brain. When you want to teach somebody a soft skill, things you do with people, what you really want to do is tickle their limbic system, right? Is the emotional, the flight or flight part of your brain. And yet, if you take a look at the technological paradigms of online learning, or heck, any kind of learning really, it really is all about cognition. It's the prefrontal cortex proxy, if you will. And so I don't know about you, but when somebody calls me about learning, the phone doesn't ring and say, Tom, I'm really having a hard time teaching my people how to code Java. That is just not something that I get. What do I get? Communications, leadership, all of the soft skills things. And why is that? Well, because what they've done is they've used a hard skill, prefrontal cortex, cognitive approach to teach people how to do soft skills. And so what you walk away with is you're like, you guys are idiots, right? You don't know anything. I'm have all of this great technology. And there you have it, Kyle. That's the headwind that I've been talking about. So what I'm trying to do is saying, how can I create what I call a technological proxy to tickle, you will, your limbic system so I can help you learn soft skills? And right now, that's hard. There is technology, and I'm working with some technology people to make that come alive. And again, this is the premise of the conservatory group that I founded, to be able to do those things in those different areas we spoke about earlier. But if you're talking about the crux, the problem, the intersection of the L&D issues, there you have it.
Fascinating. I've never heard it described like that. So, and thank you for teaching me a new phrase, tickle the limbic system. I'm going to remember that one.
Yeah, that's a highly technical term, and you make sure you use it with great care.
I'm going to use that at my next executive meeting. Like, guys, I got this great program. It's going to tickle your limbic system. And hopefully I don't get a complaint, but I
was going to say, given what your position is, you might.
I guess they'd lodge it. They'd lodge it with me, but hey. So limbic system. So, for those of us that don't understand the inner workings of the brain, myself included. So when you're talking about the limbic system, give me like a like what you would tell my 9-year-old son, what is the limbic system and how do we get it engaged?
Yeah, that's where the flight or fright piece of your brain resides, whether or not you are encountered with a T-Rex and you trying to figure out whether or not you can run away from them or you can take them on. And it's emotionally charged.
Got it. Okay.
Where the prefrontal cortex is where we keep all of our knowledge and our judgment of that knowledge, where we can put things like, what's good, what's bad into perspective. And they're actually, different parts of the brain, located in different parts of the brain. And so there are different ways to access it. So for example, when you're doing hard skills, all of the logical ways of connecting to content, such as listening to a lecture, reading a book, listening to a podcast, these all really charm their ways into your prefrontal cortex and fill you with knowledge and abilities. However, those are not the ways into your limbic system. You can't read something and make your limbic system come alive. You have to feel it. You have to experience it. And so when you start looking at learning, right, your listeners will pick up on this pretty quickly. The idea here is that if I want to learn something, it's certainly a lot easier for me to do it, especially if I'm sitting in front of you having a conversation like we are now and engaging with you and trying to be social and maybe getting cues from your facial expressions or your tonality to teach me a little bit about what you're thinking, right? All of these expressions and these entry points are all going into your limbic system. So if I want to teach you something, that's the avenue, that's the vehicle, that's the roadway, whatever you want to call it, the highway, to get that information to you such that you're able to execute.
Got it. Okay. So to me, it almost reminds me of, it's like the difference between driving your car and paying attention and having a CD on in the background versus going to a concert and crowd surfing.
That's an excellent. What's interesting here, what we're doing, Kyle, is we're trying to talk about these soft skills things in a very hard skill medium,
right?
Podcasting, and we are trying to utilize different tools in our arsenal, such as inflection of our voices, whether we're speaking louder or speaking softer, or being funny, trying to say funny things, trying to say serious things, so we can convey the softer side, if you will, of this information. However, if I was just wanting to give you data, none of that would matter. Right? I would just be able to read off a phone book, and you'd be able to get all the information you needed without any of the other window dressing.
That's the next episode. We're just going to read the
Adam Aardvark would be the first.
See, there I go. I'm trying to be funny. I'm just trying to access that, tickle the limbic system. All right, good. But this is great. It's just fascinating to me. And actually, this is one of those things. People ask me how I like my job or what keeps me in HR. And a lot of times I jokingly say, well, job security, because people are crazy. But the honest truth is, the fascinating thing about my job is it's trying to figure this whole thing out and trying to figure out people and trying to connect with people. And for me, it's just like this crazy puzzle that you're trying to solve every single day. But, the tough part is there's really no solving it. It is, it's an ever changing.
Yeah, it's trying to make it better. I
right.
think that's really, if we shoot for that goal, I think we have a shot. But the solving, I don't think we can get there.
And now, a word from our sponsors. When Molly, Patrick, and I started to figure out how to start our own podcast, we didn't know where to start. Thankfully, we found Buzzsprout. Buzzsprout makes it super easy for us to upload our episodes, track our listeners, and get listed on all the major podcast networks. Today's a great day to start your own podcast. I know that you're one of our listeners, so you've definitely got something to say. Whether you're looking for a new marketing channel, have a message you want to share with the world, or just think it would be fun to have your own talk show, Podcasting is an easy, inexpensive, and fun way to expand your reach online. Buzzsprout is hands down the easiest and best way to launch, promote, and track your podcast. Your show can be online and listed in all the major podcast directories within minutes of finishing your recording. Podcasting isn't that hard when you have the right partner. And the team at Buzzsprout is passionate about helping you succeed. Join over 100,000 podcasters already using Buzzsprout to get their message out to the world. And now, for listeners of Rebel HR, you can get a $20 Amazon gift card sent to you from Buzzsprout by clicking in the link in the show notes. Thanks for listening.
Are you looking to grow your personal brand or your business brand? Take it from me that podcasts are a great way to do it. Here's the secret. We all want to feel connected to the brands that we buy from. What better way to humanize a brand than through sharing your personal story on a podcast? I have had great success with Kitcaster. Kitcaster is a podcast booking agency that specializes in developing real human connections through podcast appearances. And let me tell you, it's all about the right human connection. You can expect a completely customized concierge service from their staff of communication experts. Kitcaster is your secret weapon in podcasting for business. Your audience is waiting to hear from you. For a limited time offer, listeners to the Rebel HR podcast can go to www.kitcaster.com/rebel to get a special offer for friends of the podcast. Rebel on. Yeah, so I think, and that's something that, I want to dig into a little bit. And I agree 100%. If you go into work and you think that you're going to check everything off your list and you're going to walk away and you're going to say, yep, well, done, did it. Okay, I HR'd today. Now I can go home and not think about it anymore. It's just, that's not the job. And I don't think that's any job where you are interacting with people on a regular basis or leading others. There's just got to be incremental progress towards your goal. And if you work towards something and you make a little progress, you just got to be happy with it. So speaking of something that takes a lot of time, energy, and is really a hard concept to grasp and something we're never really going to reach the destination on, I want to talk a little bit about diversity. Specifically, we were talking before the show, talking a little bit about neurodiversity. And I know that you've spent a lot of time here. So why don't we shift gears and give us a little bit of your perspective on neurodiversity in the workplace and, how that should be a focus or how that can be a focus for a learning and development professional or an HR professional.
Yeah. Let me take a running start. So I guess it must have been, 15 years or so, I found myself doing some hardcore research around diversity and inclusion, specifically around gender. I got to tell you, honestly, it wasn't anything that I thought I would get into, but it through my work in different cultures around the world, I landed there. And I published some academic papers. They got printed in some fancy journals, and I kept going. And here we are. We have these social unrest, and we have a whole bunch of people basically really focusing on, what we all believe diversity is, which is gender and race and sexual orientation and some of the standard things. And I don't want to minimize it. It says there's a lot of effort and time being put into it, but I have to tell you, there's a people group that really needs a lot of attention and focus on our part, which is those that are neurodiverse. Specifically, when I say neurodiversity, I'm talking about people that are in the autistic spectrum. And that spectrum, is very, very wide, all the way from one side where they're very highly functional to those that have a real hard challenge, both mentally and physically, trying to deal with our world. Kyle, you and I would be considered neurotypicals. And so I'll start by saying that the world around us is a neurotypical world. There are social expectations in a neurotypical world that make the neurodiverse very, very difficult to deal with. Think of our world as being a huge staircase and having us in wheelchairs looking at it. That's the same feeling that those in a neurodiverse spectrum feel. And I'm going to put a statistic out here for you and let you react and let your audience react. 74% of everyone on the spectrum is unemployed.
Wow.
If I were to say to you, Kyle, 74% of all Black women are unemployed, what would you say? How would you react?
It's travesty. That's
yet,
wrong.
Here we are, right? 74% of people on the spectrum are unemployed. Now, what are some of the issues? The first issue in any D&I discussion is what I call representation. To solve the problem, we need to have tools to represent groups. And if you take a look at what's happening in organizations today with employee resource groups, affinity groups, those kinds of things, that is wonders for representation. Not only that, but we have great things happening in the social spectrum with President Biden Juneteenth, right? So signing that into law as basically a holiday, but more of an opportunity for us to remember. We have International Women's Day. We have a lot of marches and a lot of vocalization and representation. It gives us an awareness of what's happening. Let's take that same view in the neurodiverse world. This is a group of people that's exactly what they don't want to do.
Mm-hmm.
They don't want to march. They don't want to be vocal. They're uncomfortable being vocal. Hence, they disappear. They're invisible in corporate world. So does that make it right? Well, in my perspective, I'll say no, it doesn't. So what can we do, right, to move that agenda forward? And that's kind of where I've spent a lot of my time as of late, is trying to understand how we neurotypical people can help the neurodiverse. Problem number one, you can't see it.
Yeah.
Not only can't see it, it's very, very difficult to diagnose because those that have it make it very hard to diagnose. They don't want to be called out, if you will. And I don't mean called out in the bad sense. I mean just identified. And so here you have it. How do you know who has what? Because guess what? Neurodiverse people are Black, they're women, they're Latinos, they're gay, they're lesbian, they're everything, right?
Yeah.
And so it's the diversity that traverses all the other groups. So there you have it. Is the problem is a real problem. We don't have really good solutions, and yet I always start with the darkness to bring us into some light. And yet we know that a neurodiverse employee is a highly, highly productive employee.
Mm-hmm.
There are organizations such as SAP and Microsoft that have inclusive, specialized neurodiverse groups to foster them into the workplace and place them in jobs that they will succeed. They are highly detailed. They are highly loyal. SAP, 1% of their entire staff is neurodiverse, their entire company. Now, one would think 1% is really low, but actually 1% is 3 times the normal population that you will find, at least that we are been able to diagnose and to count. So, and SAP has been able to qualify and quantify the productivity of people that have that neurodiverse bent to their personality. So I'll pause there because I did a lot of talking and see what your reactions are.
Yeah. So first of all, Tom, thank you for bringing this topic to light and for, the 74% of people on the spectrum or neurodiverse being unemployed is a shocking number. And as a professional that hires people, that's something that we all need to be aware of. If you're sitting in my seat or a similar seat, you need to be mindful of this. I felt definitely the limbic system was going on because I was feeling the goosebumps here as you were telling the story, because I've had situations in the past where I've hired somebody who was neurodiverse, and I've been very fortunate to see this firsthand. So if you'll humor me, I'll share a story. So
please.
I'm very fortunate to be connected to some local community organizations, one of them being Vocational Rehabilitation, which is an agency who specifically gets individuals with disabilities jobs, right? Sounds like, hey, if you're in HR, you should probably know this organization. Right? I mean, yeah. So call out to anybody in HR that's not working with Voc Rehab. Go find your local office. They get government dollars to do this. So you might as well, leverage those dollars. But I got connected to an individual who I was at a high school, and I was talking about my organization. We're a manufacturing company. And every single one of those kids was on their phone and just like the most bored that they could possibly be. And they're like, who's this short white guy in this polo telling me about this job that I have no interest in doing? I want to be a YouTube star or whatever. But there was one guy in the audience, and he was locked in, man. Yeah. He was watching every movement that I made, listening to every word I said. And he was just intently listening. And after that, if you ever want to be scared as a public speaker, go talk to a bunch of high school kids, because they're going to tell you the truth. So it was pretty atrocious. But I walked up to the guy after and I said, hey, man, listen, you were really listening. Thank you for listening. And at that point, I realized, okay, he is neurodiverse. He's uncomfortable making eye contact, and he probably is really uncomfortable that I came up to him to confront him and thank him. But I could tell it was uncomfortable, but he made a comment. He's like, I thank you for coming. I really appreciate you coming. And I want to go to school for auto body, and I want to be a car mechanic. And so, the jobs you do are similar to mine. So I'm like, cool. And I'm like, here's my card. We do summer hire programs, and, we'd love to bring you in, and so sure enough, he remembered it, and he came in and he filed. And when he came in, we gave him a shot. It was an absolutely terrible interview. Had we not been aware and accommodative of, his differences, then he wouldn't have got the job. We were like, I like this guy. We're going to give him a shot. Yep. So he comes in and he's just hungry to learn, but he learned a little bit differently. And one of the things we were challenged with was productivity. He was so meticulous and detail focused that it took him a long time to do things. So what we ended up doing is we got him a little counter, a little clicky thing that just like counts how many times you do something. And we said, we just need 14 in an hour. And man, he hit 14 every single hour. And it was at the quality level well above any other new hire. And to this day, he's still in that organization many years later. And, it's one of those situations where there was a connection. There was some initial discomfort on that individual's part, but ultimately we took a chance and it worked. And so, anytime I get an opportunity to think a little bit differently about the work that we do, I try to do it. I think the other thing I'll say, and I'm talking too much here, but I do think the other thing I want to call out, we're talking about soft skills. Yep. The other buzzword that kind of drives me crazy is culture, right? Because it's such a nebulous term, but I would tell you that the cultural impact of hiring this individual and the team that bonded around us helping this individual be successful was so much stronger than I've ever seen in any other similar type of new hire. It became more like a family. It became a connected group. And it's because they had maybe it was the limbic system. They cared, right? There was something to be passionate about, and there was something to be proud about to work at that organization. So
that's a great story, Kyle. Thank you for sharing, because now that's become my story.
Good. Take it, run.
But you hit the nail on the head, right? I mean, people will say, well, if it's so difficult, so hard, or why bother? It's like, well, because of what you just said. And to think, again, that 74% of these people don't have a job is just, it's a crime. And it's interesting. And I'll tell you, I want to bring another two terms into this discussion, which is fairness and equality. So like anything else, right? Anything worth doing in HR is worth overdoing. So, right, we have D, then we have I, and then we have E, and now we have B. I think the next letter is F. No, it's not that. It's fairness.
Okay. I didn't know where you're going with it, Tom, but yeah, okay.
I know.
I can get on that train.
No, it's fairness. And I'll tell you why, because I think people talk about equality and fairness in the same breath, and they're not. There's an excellent little cartoon meme on the internet you can go get, which is 3 young boys looking over the fence at a baseball game. And there are 3 crates. And equality is each boy gets a crate, and you had one boy is very tall, a medium, and a short. So equality means everybody gets 1 crate. And fairness means the short boy gets 2 crates, the middle boy gets 1 crate, and the tall one doesn't get any crates. But they all get to watch the game. I think what you have just described in this young man that you hired is a great example of fairness, because you didn't make him go through the gauntlet of the standard. You didn't give him the same crate that everyone else gets when they walk in. He needed 2 crates. And I think that is not only perfectly fine, but that's a strategy to itself. When do you actually take a look at equality versus fairness? And I'm going to give you an operational definition so people can think of it. They both have to do with company resources. One tells you how valid you are. The other one gives you opportunity. So equality shows you the value that you bring. Fairness is giving you the opportunity, and they're both company resources. And I think that's why the terms get intermingled, because they both talk about company resources. And I think it's perfectly fine to give somebody 2 crates when they need it. And guess what? People don't need any crates, then they don't get any crates. And it's got nothing to do, as long as they have the same opportunity to execute or to get promoted or wherever it might be. So to circle back around in this whole story, I mean, I think there is an entire diversity thought, but budding in when you start taking a look at organization or a people group such as the neurodiverse.
Absolutely. And I think that's one of the more powerful things that I've learned just through the years that I was relatively ignorant to prior to really getting more aware of diversity, equity, and inclusion was the difference between equality and fairness, and the fact that, equal, in my opinion, the whole equal opportunity thing needs to be thrown out the window. It needs to be fair opportunity.
Slow, painful death.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And, even we all have our opinion of the EEOC, but Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, it's, to me, it's like, if you're doing something just so you don't get sued, or you're doing something just so, so that you're not like threatened for discriminatory lawsuits or whatever, it's like, okay, I think you're focused on the wrong thing. Exactly. I think you need to be more worried about how your business wins and how your people succeed than whether or not you're going to get sued for not being equal enough, right? I mean, it's come on, you do the right thing, you'll be fine.
No, it's true, and it's right. And I think what'll happen is, if let's say you fast forward, I don't know, 50 years, unfortunately, probably for this to pan out, you won't have to talk like this anymore. We won't need those laws and those policies, because the right thing is getting done. But if we want to give people a leg up, I shouldn't say a leg up, but an opportunity, say, pick your people group, your genders, your sexual orientations, race, there's got to be some give upstream. I mean, the fact is, I work in technology. Right now, chalk line on the technology pool of people, it's mostly men. It just is. You know this.
Yeah.
Why? Upstream, right? What are the opportunities upstream for women and for others to get into the space? Well, I think, again, I'm going to use the metaphor, right? They need 2 crates, then so be it.
Right. I tell you one thing. So I recruit a lot of engineers. If I can find an engineer with any diversity characteristics, that person's probably going to get an interview. But it is a challenge. And I think that's that's certainly a call to action, that we also need to be diversifying the places that we draw talent from. We need to be very thoughtful, intentional about where we source talent. And we need to be thoughtful about the partnerships we make with community resource providers and educators. And, for me, that might sound a little bit like kumbaya, but that is, I think, what it's going to take. We all got to come to the table, employers included, and help support all individuals to achieve their full potential. So,
yeah.
No, I'm with you.
I wanted to say one more thing, if you don't mind, in this space before we walk, leave this topic, because your listeners are probably those that are trying to do the best they possibly can in this space. And I truly believe that. And I want to tell a story that is a very simple and easy but enlightening story. So it wasn't too long ago, I think it was these last elections in November, where a major population of the Native American people, which is up in the sort of the north central part of our country, they weren't voting. And so we were all very concerned about the fact that they weren't voting. And so we drove out there, we meaning the ubiquitous us, right? People, right, have that worry about this kind of stuff. Drive out there trying to get people to vote and give them the pamphlets and give them all of the forms and tell them we're going to drive. And yet we're not driving voting registration at all. Until finally somebody came to a conclusion and sort of followed somebody and say, okay, let's get you to vote. And I don't know if you know this, Kyle, but for you to register to vote, you have to have a street address. You have to have a number, and you have to have a street name with a zip code and all that. A lot of the Native Americans live in reservations. And did you know that reservations, they don't have street numbers and addresses?
No, I didn't know that.
So here you have a policy that is wired to ensure that nobody that has street addresses can vote. So my challenge to those listening is, what does your voter form look like in your company? Right? Does it have something on there that precludes a certain people group from participating? Do they need 2 crates? Right? Do you need to change that policy? You may have all the best intentions in the world and a heart of gold, but if you are overlooking such a simple thing such as a street address, you might be precluding those people unwillingly or unknowingly anyway, or unconsciously. So I'll leave that for everyone's device.
Tom, that's a perfect analogy for this group. And I'll be a little bit more explicit to any HR professionals out there. What that means is attendance policies, policies related to background checks and drug screens, policies related to previous convictions, policies related to having to have a home address on your application. Guess what? There's all sorts of things that we can impact in our organizations. And the question I always ask is, okay, why? Why does that policy exist? And the honest answer is, well, we don't know, but it's been that policy for over 20 or 30 years. So that's just what we do, right? So when you have those situations, in my mind, it's our job to get rid of them. So, well said. Well, Tom, gosh, I have a list of things I wanted to go through, and we just got through 2. So we're gonna have to pick this conversation up, but we are quickly running out of time, and I want to make sure we get through the Rebel HR Flash Round. So, are you ready to go?
I'm ready. Give it.
All right. Okay. Question number 1: what is your favorite people book?
People book, you said?
Yeah.
Atomic Habits comes to mind. If that qualifies, does that qualify as a people group?
Yeah. Is that who's the
James
author
Clear?
of that? I'm sorry, I cut
James
you off.
Clear.
James Clear. Yeah, I think that applies. I was just listening to a podcast about that. So fascinating.
It's
fascinating
one
stuff.
that keeps coming back to me. I've actually done an entire literary series review video, kind of like a read along with Tom kind of video thing I do. And there's so many ins and outs to that book that I personally think that James didn't even think of it himself. So, read it 3 or 4 times and then go back on the 4th time and read it again. You'll find some gems there as well.
Love it. All right. Perfect. All right. Question number 2. Who should we be listening to?
As of late, I have been listening to productivity guys. So Eric Fisher over at Beyond the To-Do List is one that comes all on. Mike Vardy just renamed his podcast from The Productivityist to A Productive Conversation. And what's interesting about those folks, it's not, hey, use this latest task management tool. it's really, as Eric Fisher says in his podcast, it's the people behind the productivity. So I've been listening to meditation techniques and stress reducers and all that are all coming out of these podcasts. So that's where I've been. And I think we all should do that, not necessarily because of the productivity side of things, but I think there's a quality of life that's coming out of those people.
Yeah. Yeah. We just had a guest on who I think had a one-on-one session with me by the end of it, because she's a psychologist, but she was talking about, the meditation and finding that space in your day and finding that quiet in the context of preventing burnout. And it's definitely something that I could do more around. Let's put it that way.
Likewise.
All right. Last question. How can our listeners connect with you?
Obviously there's all the standard ways of doing it, but I have a new thing that I've been doing. You can connect me through Voxer. It's an application. It's free to use. And my username is Dr. Tom Tonkin, Dr. Tom Tonkin, Ton as in Nancy, Kin. And you will get directly to me. Voxer is a synchronous and asynchronous voice mailing type of tool. And I got to tell you, man, that has made me so extra more productive doing that. People can reach me directly. Sometimes I just say, I got a question. I got a simple question. It requires, I don't want to put it on the calendar or anything like that. So go there. Obviously I'm on LinkedIn, My claim to fame, Kyle, is if you type in Tom Tonkin in Google, the whole front page is me. And people would say, wow, you must be like super famous or something. No, I think I've figured out the algorithm, but
well, you are in tech, right?
Yes, that's
a little bit of an inside track.
Yeah. Anyway, but I look forward to anybody who wants to chat and have this conversation, and hopefully, Kyle, we can do it again.
Absolutely. I think we just barely scratched the surface, and people are listening to this, but as I watched you talk about some of the work that you've done, I can see the passion behind it, and I can feel the sincerity of the work that you do and the energy you put behind it. So thank you for putting that work in and for helping our listeners learn a little bit today. Just kind of scratch the surface, but looking forward to continue to connect with you and learn from you. So thank you very much, Tom.
Likewise. Thank you.
All right, that does it for the Rebel HR podcast. Big thank you to our guests. Follow us on Facebook at Rebel HR Podcast, Twitter at Rebel HR Guy, or see our website at rebelhumanresources.com. The views and opinions expressed by Rebel HR Podcast are those of the authors and do not necessarily reflect the official policy or position of any of the organizations that we represent. No animals were harmed during the filming of this podcast.
Baby.